Bom dia a todos. É com grande prazer que eu estou incumbido aqui de coordenar essa nossa sessão. E é com grande prazer que eu vou apresentar as pessoas aqui presentes, porque é uma sessão muito importante para a gente, do ponto de vista de que essa mesa ela foi montada na hora da organização do seminário, no auge da crise econômica, e a gente pensou, vamos trazer pessoas de ponta, pessoas que estão na fronteira da discussão sobre a questão regional do mundo, e vamos discutir os impactos regionais, do ponto de vista dos blocos regionais, do ponto de vista internacional, da crise econômica. E nós temos aqui hoje o prazer de receber dois professores que são referências para quem estuda a dimensão regional no mundo. À minha direita, o professor Philip McCann, atualmente na Universidade de Groningen, na Holanda, também na Universidade de Waikato, na Nova Zelândia, que é autor de um livro de economia regional que eu acredito que hoje seja usado na grande maioria dos programas de pós-graduação, não do Brasil apenas, mas do mundo na área de economia regional. Ele escreveu um livro chamado Urban and Regional Economics, que foi traduzido para mais de 40 países. Estava conversando com a Ana ontem, e nós vamos nos incumbir de fazer essa tradução para o português também, vamos tentar publicar, porque é um livro que ele nasceu clássico. Esse é um livro que nasceu com o primeiro capítulo, nasce clássico. O professor Philip, ele tem uma produção na área de... Ele é dessa Universidade de Groningen, e a Holanda tem essa particularidade, ele é uma universidade que tem uma faculdade de ciências espaciais, Spatial Science. Ele é do Departamento de Geografia Econômica, mas a faculdade inteira é da área de Spatial Sciences, que trabalha com geoprocessamento, com economia, geografia econômica, com toda essa parte. E ele é uma pessoa que nos honra com a presença e vai nos falar, vai ser o primeiro a falar. Tá, atualmente, assim, tem uma grande linha de pesquisa. A principal, atualmente, é sobre mobilidade de fatores de produção, de capital, de trabalho, de pessoas e investimento. E ele vai nos falar sobre essa questão mais geral, panorâmica, da questão dos impactos que a crise financeira de 2008 teve do ponto de vista do arranjo regional do mundo. Ali à minha esquerda, professor André Rodrigues Pose, a quem tive o prazer de conviver durante um ano, quando eu estava no pós-doutorado na LSI. Convidei ele várias vezes, insisti bastante, ele está nos dando a honra, por cima de uma quantidade de tarefas que ele tem que se desincumbir, de estar aqui presente e nos honrar. Ele é a gente brincou que é a primeira vez que ele vem ao Brasil, apesar de ter ido a São Paulo várias vezes já, mas agora ele está vindo ao Brasil e está gostando muito. Ele é uma pessoa que tem um texto que é clássico já, com o professor Glauco Arbix, ex-presidente do IPEA, sobre federalismo fiscal no Brasil, sobre a guerra fiscal no Brasil. E eu tive o prazer de conhecê-lo quando estava em Londres. É uma pessoa de finíssimo trato, um gentleman, um espanhol perdido naquelas terras da rainha, mas que era o antigo chefe do Departamento de Geografia e Meio Ambiente, de Geography and Environment, à London School of Economics and Political Science. Se desincumbiu dessa tarefa de ser chefe do departamento, está muito feliz por isso, segundo ele mesmo, mas ele está atualmente fazendo a ponte. Ele está em Madrid, que ele está no ano sabático dele, e ele é detentor de um grant, de um major grant na Inglaterra, que é o Leveson Major Research Fund, e ele está trabalhando atualmente com o que ele chama de impactos das políticas públicas no desenvolvimento econômico, e a política econômica do desenvolvimento. Ele é managing editor, ele é editor-chefe de uma das mais prestigiosas revistas acadêmicas do mundo na área de economia regional, que é a Environment and Planning C, que é a Environment and Planning de Government and Policy. Ele trabalha com política econômica regional do ponto de vista aplicado, e essa revista talvez seja talvez a mais importante revista dessa área no mundo. E muito nos honra com a presença aqui nesse seminário. E aqui à minha esquerda é uma pessoa que eu vou apresentar, quase ninguém conhece, né, que está aqui na qualidade, segundo ele próprio, que ele não está aqui como reitor, né, porque se ele fosse reitor, ele tinha que falar primeiro, falar por último, abrir a mesa, então ele está aqui como aquilo que ele gosta de ser. Está aqui como um grande pesquisador que é exatamente dessa área, da área de economia regional, que é a célula máter do Campolino, e ele está aqui para nos falar também sobre a dimensão da crise e os impactos, fazendo um gancho. Se o Felipe e o Andrés vão fazer a dimensão de como que essa crise econômica, a crise financeira, impactou o desenho regional, o arranjo regional do mundo, dos países, na sua relação com as questões dos blocos regionais, o Campolino vai fazer isso, trazendo e puxando para a nossa discussão, que é a discussão brasileira. E essa mesa é uma mesa que é muito importante para nós, de ter essas pessoas tão importantes aqui, naquela tentativa que ontem o Croco já frisou, já valorizou, de tentarmos fazer esses ganchos, nós que pensamos isso para o Brasil, e tentarmos nos relacionar com quem está pensando isso no mundo. E isso é um grande prazer, uma grande honra a gente conseguir fazer isso. Pedindo para lembrar que essa sessão está sendo transmitida ao vivo, pela internet, para o mundo, né? Literalmente. E nós temos tradução simultânea, os aparelhos estão lá fora, e eu vou imediatamente, nós vamos fazer meia hora cada palestrista, o Campolino vai falar menos, segundo ele vai falar 20 minutos, e eu vou tentar regular e vou imediatamente passar a palavra para o nosso primeiro apresentador, o professor Felipe Maquin. Philip, please.
Okay, well. Okay. Well, the first thing I would like to do is to thank the organising team here at the conference, obviously Rodrigo and Marco, for inviting me here. It's a real honour and a pleasure to be here. So, my idea today is I'm going to talk in very general terms about globalisation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk in general terms about globalization, the economic geography of globalization, and then I'm going to try and get you to think about how that's related to the issues of the financial crisis, and then to think about the different aspects of the financial crisis in terms of the economic geography and also the international issues. So starting off in terms of globalization and economic geography, going to the financial crisis, and then thinking about both the explicitly geographical issues and the international issues. This is how I'm going to do this. Also, I would like to ask you to help me. I'm going to play a game with you in a few moments, and I will ask you to put your hand up at certain moments. Please do it. Don't be embarrassed. But it's important to demonstrate something. So if I ask you to put your hand up at a certain moment, please do it. And you'll understand why when we play this game. Poor Andres has seen this about 7 times, so if he doesn't do it, I will excuse him. Okay, so this is the structure. This is how I'm going to try and do this. Talk about geography and globalization. Then we go on to talk about the crisis, and then we think about the spatial aspects of the crisis and the institutional aspects. So when we talk about globalization, what do we mean? Well, there's different ways of thinking about this. We can talk about international trade, increases in communications. We can talk about global branding, Nike, McDonald's, this kind of thing, Starbucks. We can talk about multinational companies, Embraer, for example, building planes all over the world. We can talk about the rise of Asia. Lots of people think of globalization, they really focus on China and India, the huge growth in Asia in particular. But of course, Brazil is one of the big, fast-growing economies. And many people talk about globalization as kind of a shrinking world. The world is a global village. Everybody's on Facebook, emailing, internet, YouTube, all that type of stuff. Well, one thing about globalization is it is about perceptions. And one thing that geographers know is perceptions not only matter, but where you perceive the world from also matters, your starting point. As information technology started to advance rapidly, by the late 1980s, early 1990s, particularly after the invention of the internet in 1991, many people started talking about the end of geography. The death of distance. So these authors I've listed here are very, very senior people, including a member of the United States President Council of Advisors, talking about the end of geography. Famous book by Francis Cairncross, The Death of Distance. And most recently is Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, which is the best-selling non-fiction book in the world. It is incredibly influential in politics, international relations, big business, and also certain areas of the academic world. And the argument is that because of technology, YouTube, file sharing, Facebook, that it doesn't matter where you are. The world is flat, it's even, we're all part of the same village. Well, it goes back to this issue of perceptions. I would encourage everybody to buy a copy of The World is Flat and to read it. Why? Because it is completely wrong. But it is extremely important because it influences people's perceptions. So very senior people are very influenced by this. It is almost entirely wrong. There is one aspect in which it is correct, but I'm not going to talk about it here. Between 1989 and 1994, the world changed. In many ways, it was the largest transformation in 500 years since the start of modern globalization. What happened? Well, obviously, Brazil started to open up in a new way, obviously with the establishment of the new currency. I think it was 93, was it the real? 94? 94. 94 was the North American Free Trade Agreement. 1991 was the European Single Market. Nelson Mandela came out in 1990. The industrial reforms in India after the assassination of the Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, was in 1991. The second industrial reforms in Indonesia were in 1991. Tiananmen Square was in 1989. The Internet was invented by Tim Berners-Lee in October 1991. The world changed. And you can see it on a huge range of different indicators. A third of the world's labour market suddenly appeared. And the scale of this is really hard to imagine. The transition economies, the former Warsaw Pact countries, brought 260 million new workers into the global labour market overnight. China brings 760 million. India, 440 million. We have the rise of what are known as the BRICS countries. Of course, Brazil is one of them. The original BRICS were BRIC, but the OECD now lists the BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, Indonesia, China, and South Africa, because they are the countries in which foreign investment is pouring in. Globalization is about foreign investment. The scale of foreign investment now, the sales from the overseas affiliates of multinational companies, so a General Motors factory in Brazil, not General Motors selling cars within the United States, not Toyota within Japan, but a General Motors factory in Brazil, plus a Toyota factory in the UK, the total sales of foreign affiliates are 2.5 times the size of global exports. Globalization is not about trade. It is about foreign investment. Now that's the difference. We're talking about something which is qualitatively different, and it happened very quickly and very recently. But for our younger colleagues, for example, students in the university, you were mostly born around this time. So you do not know the world that existed beforehand. Whereas Rodrigo is old enough to know a previous world.
I'm old.
And so am I. What are the outcomes of this? Well, we have a changing architecture of global trade. The spatial structure of trade globally is changing because of these big emerging economies such as Brazil and India. But the world is not shrinking. Economic activity is dispersing slowly from the richer countries to the transition and developing and middle industrializing countries. But industrial dispersion is not shrinking. They are different things. The most important issue here is China. Is simply the scale effect of China is of a different order of magnitude to every other country. The Chinese economy is 4 times the size of the Indian economy. And of course, China is now the fastest growing country in the world. So the real change in trade structures globally, including the trade patterns of Brazil, are also being influenced by China. South America as a whole is increasing its scale of agricultural exports, enormous exports into East Asia, and it's primarily the expansion of China which is driving these changing trade patterns. But what we also see is the key role of these integrated areas such as the European Union, the North American Free Trade Agreement, South and East Asia. These blocks of countries together, obviously we have Mercosur here, these groups of countries together are actually becoming more important as groups in the global economy. And there's lots of data on this that demonstrates that this is true. So what do we see in terms of globalization? Well, the globalization is, what we talk about globalization, in terms of economics, economic geography, there are several phenomena. The first one is the world is converging slowly, which means that lower income countries are slowly catching the richer countries. That is true except for Africa. You have to remove the whole continent of Africa from that story, because in the African case, that is not true. But the rest of the world is pulling away from Africa and is slowly converging. Because the growth rates in countries such as Brazil, India, Vietnam, China are just so much faster, they're so much bigger than the growth rates of countries such as the Netherlands and Sweden. So this is true. But while we have slow international convergence, we also have inter-regional divergence. Every single country in the world is becoming more unequal internally. And of course you see this in Brazil. Why? Well, this is true in Brazil, but it's also true in Japan. The fastest growing labour market in Japan is Tokyo, which is the world's largest city. I was working in New Zealand. The fastest growing labour market in New Zealand is the country's largest city, Auckland. London is the dominant labour growth area in the UK. This pattern is more or less in every single country. So of course it's a strange phenomenon of globalisation, of convergence, but within every country increasing divergence. Why is this? Well, the major reason, it's different in different countries. There are complexities in every country, we know that. But the broad story is this: it's because of the phenomenon of what we call agglomeration. Agglomeration appears to have increased in importance since 1989. That this period of modern globalization, the start, was 1989 to 1994. And you can see it in trade data. You can see it in urban growth data. There was a structural shift that started almost exactly in 1989. The importance of cities, dense big cities, seems to have increased in almost every country. Why is this? Well, we do know that now, since 2008, half the world's population now live in big cities, in urban areas. More than half the world's population for the first time in history, as of 2008. It seems that cities are associated with kind of knowledge activities. That seems the story that most people are focusing on around the world. And why is that? Well, it appears that there is a premium for face-to-face contact. And you can see it in income distribution data. People with higher skills, higher education, the gap between them and people with lower skills is increasing. And it's also true geographically according to the skills compositions of the cities. So if you take places like Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, this is not difficult to understand. But it's the same argument in London, the same in Amsterdam, where I live now in the Netherlands. But why is that the case? Because we have information technology. The world is flat, we can talk to anybody. So why would there be a premium for face-to-face contact? Surely we can do everything on the internet. Okay, here's the game I want you to play. I want you to put your hand up properly so I can see it. If, not too quickly, Marco, please put your hand up if you have a mobile phone. And please keep your hand up if you sometimes use the internet, or email, or a fax machine, or Google, or anything like this. Okay. So the world is flat, right? We can communicate with anybody. Now, please keep your hand up. In the last week, have you sent or received an electronic message via email, internet, cell phone, doesn't matter. Keep your hand up if you have sent an email to Romania, Moldova, Nepal, Mongolia, Bhutan. Bhutan, anybody? How about New Zealand? Good. 3 people, 3 of us, New Zealand. What about Greenland? Anyone for Greenland? No? Korea, maybe? One of the world's biggest economies, 3 people, Korea? Yep, same here. Yep. Finland, one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, 3 people? Yep. How about Angola? How about Portugal? Yeah. Okay, there's a few things happening. How about Argentina? Ooh. How about another country in South America? Anywhere? Okay. How about you sent or received an email to somewhere else in Brazil? How about in the same city in which you work? How about in the same part of the same city in which you work? How about in the same office in which you work? How about in the same corridor in which you work? The world is not flat. The point is that information technology and face-to-face contact are what economists call complements. The more you interact face-to-face, the more you interact with the same people using information technology. And there is a huge amount of data to demonstrate this. The world is not flat, because face-to-face contact and information technology are complements where you are exchanging complex knowledge, where products are not standardized, where the argument is new, where things are changing a little bit all the time. What information technology does is allow you to deal with things over very large global distances. Over very large global distances. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Over very large global distances, when the products or services are standardized, when you can define a blueprint, a template, a prototype, like an Excel file. You can send an Excel file to China, you teach someone how to program that particular operation, and once they've done it once, they can do it 1,000 times. You just keep repeating. That's what information technology allows you to do. It allows you to outsource and offshore things which can be standardized. But things which cannot be standardized, you cannot outsource or offshore. You have to do it by face-to-face. So what is the implication of this? Well, we know that cities in general have higher productivity. We also know that cities produce more patents, more copyrights, more licenses, higher levels of human capital in terms of university degrees, university graduates, both in terms of quantities of people and also flows of people into the cities, higher levels of creativity, higher levels of entrepreneurship. These are general patterns across the world. How do we reconcile all of this? Well, spatial transactions costs, the cost of geography, have increased for non-standardized activities, non-routine, require face-to-face contact and the use of IT. Standardized activities can be done via IT and do not require face-to-face contact. What is the implication of this? The implication of this is this. Here are 3 cities. City X, which is this one here. Whoops. Oh, sorry. I've just made the same mistake as Jane. City X. Look, Jane. City Y and City Z. And in the middle of each city, what we see is that City Y and City X and City Z are bigger cities than City Y. And these lines here, if I can get this to work, yep, these black lines represent the land prices in each city. So the city centre have the highest land prices with a very steep gradient. And these are the centres of the cities dominated by service type activities, the CBD. A bigger city has a bigger hinterland, a bigger market area. The centre of the city is dominated by service industries. Manufacturing, engineering, retail tend to be on the edge. Smaller city has a smaller overall market area, and the land prices and the wages in the city centre are lower than in the big cities. So this would be Belo Horizonte, this would be Rio de Janeiro, this would be Sao Paulo, just as an example. But what does globalization do? Or maybe I should say, let's say Brasilia instead. What does globalization do? It does that. This is what's happening all over the world. And many places are literally disappearing. Most of China has negative growth. Most of India has negative growth. The growth in many rapidly industrializing economies is very localized in particular places, but that is also true in the United States. The middle of the United States, in many ways, is disappearing. The country in which this is most marked is Australia. Australia is the world's most urbanized country, and it is also the world's most rapidly urbanizing country. This is happening all over the world, that the geography of everything is changing because of globalization. What you want to be is you want to be in one of these places. You don't want to be here. Because if you are here, you are competing with China and Vietnam. You want to be in one of these places where you're competing with London, Paris, and Tokyo. And of course, these are the knowledge centers. It's about skills, knowledge, innovation, exactly the discussions we were having yesterday morning. But of course, which types of cities, which kinds of regions are those knowledge centers? That's a complex issue, and it's different in every country. What we do know is there are global flows of knowledge and ideas. And universities are very important as conduits, as access points to global knowledge flows. Multinationals are critical in this role because they act as a way of bringing knowledge in, sharing and building on knowledge. But all of this is mediated by face-to-face contact. Direct air transportation links are critical because it's about bringing people together who have the resources and the skills and the decision-making power to make decisions regarding investment. And globalization is opening this up to all different countries, of course. But we don't actually see globalization. What we see is global regionalism. And once again, there is a lot of data on this, that the relationships between groups of countries which are adjacent to, next to each other, are getting stronger. So across South America, the links between Brazil, Argentina, and other countries is very similar to the pattern of links between the different countries in Europe, the different countries in Asia. And there's lots of indicators that demonstrates this. So what we're seeing is the emergence of global regions that go across countries, groups of countries together. And in those global regions are what we call the emerging global cities. Sao Paulo is a global city. Indicators of trade, the movements of people, airline passengers, investment funds which are under management, patent flows, internet data. Sao Paulo is an emerging global city, and in that sense it plays a core role within the emerging regionalism processes which are taking place across Latin America. London plays the same role in Europe, in New York and so on. Once again, there's a great deal of data on this. So what we see is changing roles of regions as in groups of countries together, these increasing kind of blocks, if you like, the formation of these big super-regional blocks going across countries, but then also much more complex divergence processes within individual countries. So it's a complex picture. And the global cities are important because they are the knowledge hubs. They're the locations of the multinationals, universities, research centres, also where university graduates tend to move into. They migrate into these areas and they become these knowledge centres which then connect with the global marketplace. So it's a kind of a network process. You want to be a node in the network, you don't want to be on the line between nodes. It's basically this argument. And these global cities are increasing their global reach, literally. The influence is spreading. So what happened in the crisis? Well, given that context of globalization I've just explained, what happened in the crisis was something that effectively started in the real estate market in the United States, but the reasons for it came from savings processes in countries like China and Korea. Huge excess savings came into the global marketplace. They are mediated via the international financial system, which is basically connections in the global marketplace between places like London, New York, Paris, Sydney, Tokyo. It's very specific localities. These transmission mechanisms are obviously incredibly powerful, much more powerful than any period in history beforehand. So what was really new about what happened? What's different? We've had lots of crashes before. The stock market crash in 1987, the Asian crisis of 1997, the Russian crisis of 1998, the Russian default, and the bursting of the dot-com bubble in 2000. So, what really was different about this crisis? Was there anything really different? Well, the first thing was the order of magnitude. The scale of the crisis was something which is unprecedented in basically 80 years. So the sheer scale of what happened is simply of a different order of magnitude. The greatest levels of bad debt and foreclosures in 3/4 of a century. The greatest credit contraction since America entered the Second World War. Global and national bailouts all over the world. And of course, another interesting aspect is the economics profession were completely unprepared for it. Still living in a world of real business cycles and rational expectations. Very few economists had picked what was going to happen. And I have to say, the best one was Paul Krugman. His original book in 1999, The Return of Depression Economics, he was vilified, he was lambasted, lampooned by most of the economics profession, particularly in North America. People talked about him as a fool. What's the matter with this guy? You read the original book, it's so accurate in terms of what was going to happen and the mechanisms. And then he wrote a revised version after the crisis. A small number of other people were also extremely accurate. Andrew Oswald at Warwick was very, very close. And then there's other people now, obviously Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, George Akerlof, Michael Spence, all of whom are Nobel Prize winners, who are coming out saying, this is different, the world is different now, we have to think differently. But let's think about what actually happened. If we take the United States case, for example, the origin of the crisis, in some sense, is the transmission mechanism between London and New York. Wall Street lost 2 merchant banks, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, and 3 if you allow for the fact that Merrill Lynch, as we heard yesterday, Gary, was taken over, so it's change of ownership. The insurance giant AIG disappeared, plus several regional banks in the US. In Europe, and particularly the UK, banks and mutual funds were taken to public ownership. We heard the presentation yesterday by Jane. In China, there are now long-run fiscal imbalances related to loans to state-owned companies that became overinflated, particularly related to construction activities. Andrew and I were talking about this yesterday. In mid-2008, 35% of the world's foreign exchange deals, and even larger share of over-the-counter derivatives markets, were in London. By late 2009, the turnover was down by a quarter. And in terms of mergers and acquisition levels, which is the real hallmark of the London markets, it was at the lowest levels for 40 years. 84,000 job losses in the international financial services industry in Europe, of which about half were in London alone. And there was a lot of fear amongst the private sector companies that there was going to be a lot of regulation to try and stabilize the system, and they were all saying they were going to leave and go to all these different countries. Well, advertising agency WPP left and went to Dublin, and McDonald's moved their European headquarters to Geneva. Whoopee. Nobody else moved. Not a single financial institution has moved. ABN AMRO, which is the flagship bank of the Netherlands, the amalgamated Bank of Amsterdam and Rotterdam. It's their premium brand, actually relocated from the Netherlands to London, its headquarters. Why? Because the London office rents were so cheap, suddenly it was a great opportunity. Why did they go there? Because of agglomeration effects. So the aftermath of the crisis now is that still 80% of the European hedge funds are still in London, 60% of private equity funds are still in London. So people say, is this a Y2K story? There's nothing really happening. Well, I would argue, no, it's not. Something really fundamental happened. But what is fundamental is not in the financial markets itself. The financial markets will rebound very quickly. Why? Because they're too big to fail. And also they're the locations with very highly skilled people. They're too big to fail, which means you have, as Gary was talking about yesterday, you have a public policy rationale to keep them going. So they have an insurance policy. So in the end, New York and London will be fine. What about other regions? Well, the shocks are asymmetric. And the mechanism is this. You go from a credit crisis in the financial services industry becomes a balance sheet crisis for firms in other industries which are profitable. And then what you get is a financial crisis. Why? Because everybody starts cancelling orders of stocks and inventories. And this is what happened. And the impacts, therefore, are not just in terms of long-term investment, capital machinery, research and development, but the impacts are on short-term, current business activities. It's an immediate transmission mechanism by the cancelling of inventories. So what you get is an asymmetric shock in other industries, particularly manufacturing, logistics, distribution and engineering. Why? Because they are the industries which rely on continuous flows of stocks. Now in terms of geography, why is this important? The reason is the average level of stock holding of companies is a function of the square root of the geographical distance to the main market. The further you are away, your average stock levels, 5 minutes? Your average stock levels are higher, actually a square root function. So the effect of the credit crisis is proportionately worse on industries which are not in the financial services, and in particular if they are located away from the centre. So immediately you have a geography problem. The transmission mechanism of the crisis depends on the spatial structure. And here's a way to think about it. This is an urban hierarchy. At the top you have a big city, and as you go down you have smaller cities. Smaller cities are more specialised. Bigger cities are more diverse. Now that's very important because larger cities are more diverse. What it means is you have a portfolio effect. You have more industries in the same place, so the shocks of the financial impacts are less correlated in a big city because you have more different diverse industries. In small cities, the shocks are more highly correlated between all the activities in the city. So of course the credit crisis is more difficult for industries specialising in engineering, logistics, retail, transportation, manufacturing, and particularly in smaller cities which are more isolated and more specialised. The cities which were the cause of the problem are insulated by their scale and their diversity effect. And you can see this because it's capitalised into real estate markets. So how does this work? Well, the important thing is most small firms, SMEs, that we want to promote innovation, they borrow money by using real estate equity as the security. But what's the problem here? Well, the reason is that big cities have higher equity on average, because if you take an average constant growth rate across a country, the higher the nominal price of the real estate, the higher is the equity surplus. That is true all over the world. And credit is given on nominal levels, not real levels. All you have to show is how much equity. They don't say what is the percentage of equity you have in your property. They just say how much equity do you have as a nominal value, because that's how credit markets work. So what you have is an asymmetry between credit markets that work on nominal prices. In other words, they favour big cities because people on average have higher absolute levels of credit to use as a deposit to borrow more money. It's called a gearing problem. Big cities are a bigger portfolio effect. Small cities have a narrower portfolio. If they have a narrower portfolio, then of course interest rates effectively are higher. And how do you know that's true? Because real estate prices are lower. So it's what in financial terms we call a yield. Smaller cities, more specialised, more risky, lower land prices, lower equity levels, higher yields to compensate for the risk. It's a bond market problem. So we have a problem, because the big cities are the ones with the most diverse range of industries and the highest absolute levels of skills, because highly skilled university graduates go to places like Sao Paulo or Belo Horizonte. They go to big places, whereas the peripheral areas struggle because the outflows of high human capital makes the problem worse of being more specialized, and therefore the effective risk premium is getting bigger. So what you've got is a cumulative process of real factor adjustment, the movement of firms and people, and also the nominal credit processes related to gearing in terms of loans for industry. So this is a real problem. The point is that the locations which will be the least affected by the crisis are precisely the core locations which in effect cause the crisis. And you see this all over the world. So of course the adjustment problems are really related to other places. Have I got one more minute, Rodrigo? Literally one more minute. Okay. You also see this in terms of countries. Andres and I at the moment are working on a paper. New Zealand is an example. It's small and isolated. It was lucky in the crisis. It would have been a disaster like Iceland. But the lucky thing about New Zealand is they do not have a single New Zealand bank. They're all Australian. And Australia has a lot of money because of the extraction industry. They were lucky. Small countries isolated are vulnerable. Small regions isolated are vulnerable. Small cities isolated are vulnerable for precisely the same types of mechanisms. We know the macro stories. We have to think about the short-term versus long-term issues of cutting back on fiscal expenditure and so on. These are complicated issues. It may be that the system is more resilient than we think. I'm not convinced by that. I think there is a danger of cutting back on many fiscal activities, particularly long-term infrastructure investments. And here I'm not just talking about roads, I'm thinking in terms of education, R&D, skills, universities and so on. Particularly if inflation is being largely pushed out of the global system, you can generate very positive real returns relatively easily. The biggest impact, I would say, of the crisis that we need to focus on is coordination. Globalization requires international coordination. So the shift from a G8 to the G20 is very important. We've got Australia calling for an Asia-Pacific forum, including China, India, Indonesia, the United States. These are all positive, even with the failure of Copenhagen. Coordination is critical, and none more so than in the Eurozone. We heard Gary discussing yesterday about the Euro crisis. It's not a time for protectionism, and it's not a time for isolationism. German ministers are even calling for some sort of European monetary fund, almost like a prototype version of the IMF. China is pushing the idea of the yuan being a new reserve currency in Asia, and it's actually happening. It's already being used now in many locations in Asia as a traded reserve currency, and China has set up a $120 billion fund to back this. So, what do I think we're going to see? Long term, we're going to see increasing global regionalism. I think the crisis will have accelerated that process. I think it will also, it has to be backed by international coordination, both at a regional level and at a regional, global level. And of course, in the end, political considerations are critical here. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Philip. Passar imediatamente a palavra ao professor Andrés. Meia hora. Half an hour, please. With 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
Obrigado. Un prazer para mim estar aqui em Diamantina com você hoje para conhecer o verdadeiro Brasil. Porque, como ha dicho Rodrigo, non conosco o verdadeiro Brasil, conosco solo Sao Paulo. Un país estrangeiro inimigo, como a Argentina. Quisiera, então, agradecer a Rodrigo, a CEDEPLAR, a Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, haberme convidado para estar aqui com você. Mas como o meu portunhol é muito primitivo, farei a minha apresentação em inglês. The theme I'm going to talk today is within the general view of this conference about crisis, stimulus packages and future economic development. And I'm going to try to bring what is a case from Europe. What has happened in Europe in previous times and what are the implications for economic development in the future. And this is particularly pertinent, I think, because Brazil has, like every other country in the world, despite the fact that it's doing very well out of the crisis, implemented a considerably large stimulus package, and this package is likely to have a permanent and enduring consequences. So what has been the reaction to the crisis all over the world? If you read what most economists said immediately after the crisis, we need to try to avoid getting into a trench, and we need to try to pump money into the economy in order to make sure that we can weather the storm as well as we can. So the idea is to, in a neo-Keynesian style, put money into the economy so that we can just go on and perhaps go on in a different way, or perhaps in the same way as it might happen, and probably Phil was saying before, as we did in the past. And how do we do that? Well, in true neo-Keynesian style, the best way is to pump money into infrastructure. The aims can be two. It might be conjunctural. The idea is that to go through a short period, or let's hope it's a short period, or relatively short period, of economic downturn, but it also has structural implications. Whatever we do in terms of putting additional resources into the economy to do something that would have implications in the medium and long term for economic development. So what I'm going to try to do is, what are the implications of this? Fundamentally pumping more money into infrastructure, and present what has happened in Europe. This is the tale from Europe, and to see whether it can be avoided, the problems that we had in Europe in other parts of the world. Let me start. Why do we go for infrastructure? And hard or soft infrastructure, so transportation infrastructure or telecommunications infrastructure? Well, there are several reasons for that. I think probably the best one, if you want, let's be the least cynical, and let's go for the economic sort of explanation, which is the Keynes type of explanation. By pumping money into infrastructure, by putting money into infrastructure, you not only create multiplier effects in the economy, if you believe what Schauer say is the best sort of investment that you can do, although it's highly questionable, but at least he said that putting money into infrastructure is the best thing since sliced bread. Forget about any sort of other investment. Transport infrastructure is what really makes the difference. And of course, what you need in order to develop and to grow is to have a sufficient level of infrastructure endowment. You cannot be a developed economy if your lights go out. You cannot be a developed economy if you have shoddy roads with big potholes. So infrastructure is a necessary condition for development. So from that perspective, it's popular. It's a necessary condition, you put money into it, and you get high returns. But of course, let me just be a bit more cynical. And there are other reasons that are very important. And probably as important for decision makers and for the population are the political reasons. First one is that infrastructure is generally popular. I've been working for quite a number of years about economic development, and every time I go and work on the field and say, what do you want? They don't say we want better levels of education or better skills or more technology or improvements in the commercialization of our products. We want infrastructure. And when it's popular, it's also appealing for politicians. And why is that? Because you can gain votes by doing something that is tangible, so you can touch. You can touch a new road or a new airport or a new train station. What you cannot touch is the brain of, let's say, a highly qualified engineer from the Federal University of Minas Gerais. And of course, you can cut the ribbon, being a bit more cynical, right before the elections. One of the reasons I became an academic was in my previous life I was a civil servant, a relatively high civil servant at a very young age. And in the 2 weeks we had before the elections, I attended 75 openings of infrastructure new buildings. And I did only 1/3 of what my regional president did. And what was the use of most of those buildings? Absolutely zero. But they came out well in the newspapers. And also, as I said, it does provide a lot of opportunities for ribbon cutting. But perhaps the most important thing is, which is the one that we don't see and very often people don't talk about it, is the management advantage. That when you're building a big road, you can invest a lot of money in a relatively short period of time dealing with very few actors. I mean, you might have to expropriate, but then you have to deal with several construction companies, which might not mean easy, but try to spend the same amount of money that you would spend in a road, in a kilometer of road going from, I don't know, Belo Horizonte to Brasilia, in education. And think about the coordination problems that you'll have. And they are much, much greater. So from that perspective, the idea is that infrastructure is necessary, is needed, and is the best way to put money into stimulus packages, especially for development and for peripheral regions. Why? Because if a peripheral region, let's say Diamantina is not in the real periphery of Brazil, but is close to the periphery, let's go to the north, to states of Maranhão, Pará, Tocantins, etc. Why are these states less developed? Because they are peripheral. They haven't got good accessibility. So the solution is bring accessibility, improve the roads, improve the telecommunications, and these states are going to have a chance. They're going to come out of, let's say, this lagging situation. But of course, one of the things, and this is a sort of argument that has been put forward throughout. You're going to say, why do you put the map of Mexico there? Well, it's a simple reason. I said, I'm coming to Brazil, I'm going to put the map of Brazil. But you have a Ministry of Transports that is much more advanced than any sort of Ministry of Transports that I've seen in their website. And you go and you click, and you have the map of the new Plan of Infrastructure 2009, which is an interactive map. So it's about 40 megabytes. You can click everywhere, and you can see the exact same project, which is great when you have a very good internet connection to see what you want to do, but it's absolutely terrible when you just want a copy of the map to put in a presentation. So I can do that. So I say, I'll put a map of Argentina. I say, no, that's not good in Brazil. So I'll go for Mexico. That is an alternative. But this is what Mexico is doing. And you can see these are the new projects, and it's a popular sort of option. Let's pave the whole of Mexico with new roads and new highways. And the same has been done in Europe. This is the new plan that is being now implemented 2007-2013. So the infrastructure is popular, and it's popular mainly to let accessibility in remote areas like Bulgaria or Romania, even though you might not phone Romania, but at least you can get there, or you're going to be able to get there relatively quickly once you get to Europe, of course. And the idea is that by doing this, you can see Portugal, Spain, Bulgaria and Romania are going to catch up, and they're going to catch up fast. So this has been put into the treaties again. So the idea is that you're going to achieve greater economic cohesion and greater development by putting money into infrastructure. But there's a problem, and there's a problem especially with transport infrastructure, that we think, well, we are in Maranhão, we're in Tocantins, we are in Rio Grande do Norte, and we are isolated. So let's create a new port, or let's create a new road, and our products are going to go all the way to the market in Sao Paulo or in Belo Horizonte. The problem is what products are going to get there. And of course, a road can allow your products to go to the market, but the road, as my friend Diego Puga says, has two ways. And you can go to the market, but the market can come to you. And it's all a definition of whether your products can actually compete in a market or not. And the problem is that normally peripheral regions are peripheral, not just because they're distant, but because they have a weak economic fabric, they have less competitive firms, and therefore the likelihood is once you open a region, you're going to get that the market is going to go there rather than your products are going to go to the region. And that's going to generate what, in a different way, what Phil was saying, perhaps greater agglomeration. That economic activity is going to become much more concentrated in the cores. So you have both sides, and the question is, if you decide now, like you're doing, to pump more money into as a result of a stimulus package, because it's easy and you make decisions very quickly without having to think them through, because you have to go over a period of transition, a period of crisis. What's going to happen in the future? And in order to do that, what I've done with some colleagues, Riccardo Crescenzi and others, is to look at what has been the impact of infrastructure investment, which has taken place in Europe for the last 20 years in a big renewal effort to promote economic development in the core and in peripheral regions, and what has been the impact for development. So what we look is at different factors. And this is it has 3 dimensions, this sort of study. The first one is the conditions of every territory and the level of investment. So you take every region in Europe and you say, what is the endowment of infrastructure and what has been the level of investment in infrastructure in this region? But also, growth, which is what we're trying to analyze, is not dependent just on how much infrastructure you have and transport infrastructure, but also on whether you have the adequate socio-economic conditions, the socio-institutional conditions, whether you have the adequate capacity to generate and assimilate innovation, you invest in research and development, you have clusters, etc., and whether you have a lot of other conditions. Density was mentioned here, size was mentioned here, so agglomeration economies, whether you're more or less specialized or diversified. These are factors that make a region grow perhaps more than others. But also, whether you belong to a specific country, because it's not the same being in, let's say, the Netherlands at the heart of Europe, or being in Bulgaria in the utmost periphery of Europe, or for that sake, perhaps in Greece. So from that perspective, we look at the traditional factors, which are the endogenous conditions. But there are 2 novelties in this study. The first one is that, well, I'm a geographer at the end, so I'm concerned about space. And whether you grow is not just the result of what you have in your territory, but what your neighboring territories have. So if you have infrastructure but your neighbors don't have infrastructure, so if you are in Minas Gerais and you build a road all the way to the border with Bahia, or all the way to the border with Goiás, but there's nothing beyond that, then what your neighbors are doing matter. But not just in infrastructure, but whether your neighbors have got capacity to generate greater innovation. It's much easier being Paraná and being close to Sao Paulo than being, I don't know, Acre and being on the border with, I think, Bolivia and Peru. So from that perspective, in the middle of the Amazons, your location is going to make a difference. And it's also not the same being surrounded by regions and states with a good endowment in skills and human capital, or being surrounded by other countries or regions with poor endowments in human capital. And then the third dimension is time. That whatever you do doesn't have an impact immediately. It doesn't necessarily have an impact immediately. It might take time. You build a road, and when do you have the impact of building a road? You might have, in true Keynesian style, a multiplier effect while you're building the road. But then the true development impact, when is it going to be felt? After a year, when the road starts taking traffic? 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 15 years, 50 years? It's difficult, so you need to add a time dimension. And the question is, if you decide to go for this and compare it with other factors that promote development, does infrastructure make a difference for growth? And for whom it makes a difference? Which regions, which areas? Is it the periphery or is it the core that is going to benefit from that? So the model that we have is very simple, in which we have, what we're trying to explain is just pure economic growth, being a factor of whether you're rich or poor, your initial level of GDP, whether you have a certain level of infrastructure, you invest in infrastructure as well, you have other neighboring regions investing in infrastructure and having a good endowment infrastructure, and a series of other factors which are capacity to innovate, capacity to skills, local socioeconomic conditions, density, specialization, the factors that I mentioned before, but also in all of the regions, plus controlling for the national factors. So what are the analysis and well, we do it for Europe, and now we're doing it for India, we're doing it for China. It might be interesting to think about doing it for Brazil. We do it for Europe. We take about 160 regions in Europe, in 25 countries in Europe, although we have to drop countries with only one region because we introduce national level indicators. And for a period that goes between 1990 and 2004, using fixed effect panel data regressions. What are the results? Well, you can see them here. Of course, people over there are going to say, well, I cannot see anything. Well, there are two things. It's mainly because probably you need to check your eyesight. I cannot see from here, so I need to do it. But also, is that because this is impossible. It's just mainly to show you that there's a lot of analysis behind that there are a lot of tables like this table to try to show that the results are robust. So what do we get? So I'm going to guide you through the results. So hopefully you can see at least the bubbles over here. The first one is, let's suppose you put money into infrastructure and you have a good endowment in infrastructure. What do you get? The idea is, we've been always told that in order to develop, in order to grow, you need a good endowment of transport infrastructure. And is it true? In principle, regions that have a good endowment in infrastructure, measured in this case, the proxy is kilometers of motorways per 1,000 inhabitants, or per GDP, or per territory, they tend to be regions that grow faster than regions without a good endowment of infrastructure. So it is true that at least in Europe, for regions in Europe, having a good endowment of infrastructure is a precondition for economic growth. So the idea is, let's go and build more infrastructure in these regions. But then the problem is that you pump in more money into infrastructure through a stimulus package or otherwise, and the regions that are receiving the most in order to build roads are now not growing faster. In fact, the results are not significant. Meaning that, yes, you need to have the endowment, but just by putting more money into infrastructure, you're not going to get out of lack of economic development. That there may be other factors behind that. And the important thing here is what happens when other regions are doing the same. So we're looking at, first, if you're surrounded by other regions that have got a good endowment of infrastructure, and regions that are with a good endowment of infrastructure surrounded by other regions with a good endowment of infrastructure, so regions normally in the core, they tend to grow faster than regions that are not surrounded, that are peripheral, and therefore surrounded by other regions with poor or inadequate roads or railways. And this is where it starts getting interesting. So, but if you are in a region that is relatively peripheral, and you're not investing in infrastructure, and your neighbors tend to be investing more than you do in infrastructure, then the situation is that you might be losing out. So it gives up to an interesting dilemma, because the dilemma in the past was, should we invest in infrastructure, not invest in infrastructure? According to the original results, the answer is probably yes. But here, when you control for geographical factors, it becomes much more nuanced. That if you want to grow, you might want to consider, as we're going to see, infrastructure in connection to other sorts of actions that you might want to do in other areas. And you can wait to build until the timing is right to build new infrastructure if your neighbors are not building infrastructure. If your neighbors are building infrastructure, then that might be harmful for you, mainly because that infrastructure is going to attract mobile resources that you might have in your territory and might find your territory inadequate for economic development. So it creates the dilemma that if your neighbors are not investing in infrastructure, you can wait and think about doing other things, so it's an important issue for timing. If your neighbors are investing in infrastructure, you have the problem, you have the problem that you might have to invest in infrastructure if you're not going to lose out in the short term. What happens in terms of dimension, the time dimension? And this is interesting because most of the money of stimulus packages, whether it's in the United States or in Europe or in Mexico or perhaps in Brazil, is going to these infrastructure projects. That the potential effects of infrastructure projects tend to be short-lived. That you have an impact which is positive in the short term of endowments, but they disappear over time and they disappear relatively quickly. After 3 years, you see no effect whatsoever. And that the neutral effects of new investment remain negative or remain neutral throughout the period of analysis, which we go up to 7 years, given the time frame we have, and that the influence of infrastructure in neighboring areas is much more limited. So clearly, one of the things we have to consider is that putting money into infrastructure first does not generate that much growth. If it generates growth, it's mainly in areas that are surrounded by other areas with a good endowment of infrastructure, and the impact is short-lived. It wanes very, very quickly with time and disappears, or tends to disappear eventually. This is in stark contrast to other factors, and especially the socio-structural, socio-economic, socio-institutional conditions of your region, which include factors like the level of education, the demographic structure of the population, how well do you use your resources? Do you train people and then do you employ them? Or do you have a lot of young, highly qualified, unemployed people? Do you have a high level of female employment, or you're using 50% or 50% of your active population? And here, the results are amazing, because the main factor, whereas the motorways remain as the same when you introduce other factors, the main factor that seems to matter and is significant and remains in time, it's normally the level of the socioeconomic structure in your region, and within that, the level of skills, the level of education. The impact is always positive, and the impact is positive and remains in time. And having a highly educated population, a well-trained population, also makes a difference for innovation. You might not be able to innovate, which normally takes place in the case of Europe in core regions, but with a highly educated population, you may be able to assimilate innovation much faster. So regions with a highly endowed population get benefits from investing, for example, in research and development, normally after 3-4 years after investment. So they reinforce one another. So from this perspective, it gives an idea that perhaps doing other things may matter much more, and that investment in human capital may be a more wise type of investment, even in periods of crisis, in the medium and long term, than pumping money just into simple infrastructure. So, what is the relationship that we can get from this, or what is the general conclusions? That, first of all, doing a stimulus may be necessary for conjunctural reasons, but it gives you an opportunity to push in what are structural reforms that need to be thought through carefully. Because the impact of what you do now, especially because it might become ingrained into the system, once you put more money into one sector, that creates a path dependency that might be reproduced over the years, has structural relevance that is going to last for a long time. So what do we get from here? The first thing is that, yes, you need a certain level of infrastructure. But of course, you have to start considering quite a lot of factors altogether. That just by putting more money into infrastructure is not likely that you're going to get greater overall growth as a country. It's also more likely that it's going to lead to a concentration of economic activity in core areas at the expense of peripheral areas that are ill-prepared for that shock of new or better accessibility. That is going to probably accelerate processes of territorial inequality and territorial disparity. So it's going to lower territorial cohesion. Not necessarily social cohesion, but it's likely to affect territorial cohesion. So by putting more money, additional money, into infrastructure, the aggregate growth is also not going to grow. But if your neighbors are putting money into infrastructure, you might have no other chance but to invest in infrastructure. It's a prisoner's dilemma, as Rodrigo is saying here. Another issue is that any sort of policy that you want to do has to be dependent on the specific conditions of the territory. That, and here in contrast of what the World Bank is saying in its World Bank World Development Report last year, the idea of one-size-fits-all policy, that you can do the same for Sao Paulo as you would do for Manaus, you can do the same for Santa Catarina as you will do for, Pernambuco, is not going to work. That you have to take into account the specific conditions of territories, and therefore try to implement more than spatially blind, as the World Bank is proposing, policies. You need to implement place-specific, place-based policies, in which you take into account whether the opening of your territory into infrastructure can be done, given what you have in your territory, so the specific socio-economic conditions, the endowment of firms, the capacity of firms that you have, the level of human capital, the level of specialization, the level of accessibility that you have, and also what your neighbors are doing. What can we do if we are in the northeast, and is it the same as if we are in the south east, for example? What you have to do in Santa Catarina and Paraná is probably going to be radically different than what you will have to do in Bahia. And the same policy might yield good results in one area but not in another. And then the third thing is that the timing is absolutely important. You can benefit or lose out by what your neighbors are doing in terms of infrastructure and in terms of investment and innovation. One thing you cannot benefit from is if your neighbors have a good endowment of education, you cannot benefit that from being close to Sao Paulo, from being close to Belo Horizonte, because it does have a high level of education. You need to invest in education, whatever you do, and in training, regardless of whether people might move afterwards. That's another issue. But in the other issues, the timing is crucial. Let's take just infrastructure. Invest too early in infrastructure, and you leave your territory exposed. Why? Because your population is ill-trained and your firms are not competitive. So you might lose competitive firms, you might have other firms coming in, you might have destruction of employment locally. Invest too late, and all your potential that you might have might be lost. So the question of timing is absolutely crucial. Finding the right time is the crux, and is the most difficult part to do. It's easier said than done. When do we invest? But the best chance is probably once you have the seeds or already the capacity in terms of human skills, human capital, to be able, and firms, local firms, to withstand greater competition or increasing competition that might come through greater investment in infrastructure. Also by doing that, you're going to be able to receive or to resolve much more. So the conclusion can be that for the case of Europe, it's been very clear that over the last 20 years we have been investing in development. But development policies have been fundamentally infrastructure policies. We have connected the whole of Europe from one place to the other. We have improved massively the level of connectivity that we have within our countries. The country where I come from, Spain or Portugal, that where countries with a high deficit in infrastructure 20 years ago are now countries that are at the forefront in terms of infrastructure. They are the most advanced. In fact, Spain has got no deficit whatsoever in terms of infrastructure. But the problem is that in the last 20 years, what we have seen is that although Spain has done very well, most of the economic activity has concentrated in one city, and that is Madrid, to the detriment of all the other regions in Spain. And that is probably going to be unsustainable, because once you integrate more, Madrid is likely to lose out to bigger poles like Paris or London. So from that perspective, perhaps what we have followed has been a wrong sort of policy. Have we decided to go to more integrated policies and better time policies, perhaps what we would have had is probably less short-term growth, but what would have been more sustainable, more viable, and perhaps more cohesive, both territorially and socially, type of economic development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas, for your brilliant speech. Eu vou passar a palavra imediatamente para o Campolino. Chefe, vai lá, manda ver. 20 minutos, hein? Só corta sua palavra.
Muito obrigado. Eu acabo de assistir duas competentes, provocativas e instigantes apresentações. Como estava no programa, não estava previsto eu falar, eu ia apenas coordenar a mesa, a professora Leda Paulante seria expositora, e nós improvisamos, e eu preparei hoje pela manhã uma apresentação e consegui resgatar 3 mapas. O meu tempo é curto, eu vou apenas pincelar alguns dos pontos que foram apresentados para colocar a posição do Brasil nesse cenário. Primeiro, resgatando um pouco a fala do Philip, eu creio que o cenário mundial é central para nós pensarmos a posição brasileira. Eu concordo inteiramente com os impactos da crise do ponto de vista da geografia econômica mundial. Eu acho que a crise veio acelerar tendências, elas já estavam postas, então realmente é muito difícil de avaliar as consequências da crise para a posição dos Estados Unidos no cenário da economia mundial. De qualquer forma, os Estados Unidos perderão posição relativa, continuarão sendo a economia mais forte, mais importante do sistema capitalista mundial, mas perderá a importância relativa. Segundo, a crise traz um complicador novo para a situação europeia, a crise do Mediterrâneo, que começou na Grécia, mas que tem desdobramentos na vizinha Espanha, em Portugal e outras áreas, poderão realmente requalificar a posição europeia. Isso é uma coisa extremamente complexa. Isso traz também implicações de natureza política, do ponto de vista da governança global. Pode parecer uma chacota mundial, mas a presença do Lula, pautado pela imprensa mundial inteira, mostra que o sistema central está tendo dificuldades na condução da governança global. E é óbvio que o sistema central não vai aceitar uma interferência periférica do ponto de vista do cenário político. Mas, de qualquer forma, esses são cenários que mostram as dificuldades do sistema mundial, da governança mundial e de quais seriam as tendências da nova geografia econômica e da nova geopolítica mundial nesse redesenho. Não resta nenhuma dúvida que uma coisa é clara: a ascensão chinesa é indiscutível. A China também tem problemas políticos internos complexos, de maneira que não podemos ser linear nessa interpretação. Não resta dúvida que os BRICS terão uma posição diferenciada, e eu começaria dizendo, para colocar a posição brasileira, que o primeiro grande cenário, quais são as trajetórias tecnológicas. Nós temos uma história do capitalismo em que as trajetórias tecnológicas eram dominadas por uma tecnologia básica. Nesse momento, nós combinamos a generalização das tecnologias da informação e das comunicações, um grande avanço das biotecnologias, um grande avanço das nanotecnologias, a questão do paradigma energético continua posto, e uma questão, uma variável emergente nova, que é a questão ambiental. Então, possivelmente, nós vamos desenhar a saída desta crise com uma combinação de múltiplas trajetórias tecnológicas, o que é novo no cenário mundial. Ou seja, todas as grandes trajetórias tecnológicas tinham, digamos, uma tecnologia dominante. E, nesse momento, nós podemos estar assistindo uma combinação de múltiplas trajetórias tecnológicas que poderá ter um efeito diferenciado. Tá certo? Tudo isso, digamos, terá um impacto muito decisivo sobre a economia mundial e sobre a economia brasileira. Eu vou falar agora, cadê um pouco como a gente poderia rebater a questão brasileira. Isso aqui é um mapa, eu consegui resgatar 3 mapas agora. Esse é um mapa que mostra... Não é que isso aqui? Ah, tá. Que mostra um pouco o desenho da malha urbana brasileira, que indica a malha urbana articulada com a malha industrial, com a malha de serviço, indica um pouco o que é a nossa geografia econômica, e acho que perdeu não está mais, que mostra essa mega concentração. Não funciona. Não, eu quero a luz. A luz está muito fraca, mas não tem importância. Não. Quero voltar. Tá. Então, esse mapa mostra um pouco a geografia urbana do Brasil, que coincide com a geografia econômica, com a geografia política, e quais são as tendências em curso. Nós temos as tendências econômicas em curso. A primeira delas, digamos, é um processo de desconcentração industrial da região metropolitana de São Paulo, tá certo? Para as suas vizinhanças, para a região Nordeste, para o interior do Brasil, acompanhando a fronteira agrícola. São Paulo continuará sendo e reforça o seu papel da cidade primaz brasileira como centro de serviço central, é a bola preta que está aqui embaixo, o Rio de Janeiro é de cima, São Paulo é de baixo. Haverá um movimento de desconcentração, está em curso um movimento de desconcentração industrial, está em curso um movimento de desconcentração agrícola, que segue a fronteira agropecuária no sentido oeste do Brasil, mas também com uma expansão de agricultura irrigada na região nordeste do Brasil. Há um movimento forte de urbanização. O Brasil passa de uma população de 50 milhões de habitantes em 1950 para aproximadamente 190 milhões de habitantes, uma população que tinha 36% de grau de urbanização vivendo em cidade para 85%, então nós somos um país urbano e relativamente costeiro. Nesse momento estava sendo desenhado um movimento de integração da economia brasileira no sentido seu interior e no sentido de uma forte urbanização. Essas são as tendências que estavam sendo desenhadas no Brasil, certa expansão industrial, expansão agrícola, mudança acelerada na estrutura produtiva, que é uma tendência mundial, e no Brasil também, perda de importância relativa dos setores produtores de bens e crescimento da importância relativa tanto no emprego como na ocupação dos setores produtores de serviços, o que coincide com a força da urbanização e, mais ainda, com as mudanças tecnológicas. Foi dito aqui ontem que o Brasil produz 2,5% da ciência mundial e apenas 0,01% da tecnologia. Essa tem uma variável adicional que é importante. Eu estou inteiramente de acordo com os dados que foi apresentado pelo Duda, mas tem um elemento que ajuda a explicar isso. É que o Brasil é um país periférico, cuja expansão econômica, principalmente industrial, se fez em cima de empresas estrangeiras. E, portanto, você não internaliza tecnologia ou não internalizou tecnologia, como é o caso coreano, por exemplo, que na geopolítica do pós-Segunda Guerra Mundial se expandiu em cima de empresas nacionais. Sem negar o mérito dos coreanos, nós não podemos esquecer essa variável, tá certo, geopolítica, que fez com que os coreanos expandissem as empresas nacionais e o Brasil cresceu em cima de empresas estrangeiras, o que traz um complicador do ponto de vista da variável tecnológica. Não resta dúvida que está avançando a ciência, mas aí há um leque para poder avançar a tecnologia, né? Essas mudanças em curso levariam à interiorização do desenvolvimento brasileiro. Quais são... o que é o elemento novo? Rodrigo, como é que muda aqui? Esse aqui é a malha industrial brasileira, mostra uma relativa concentração na região sudeste, está reaglomerando no entorno de São Paulo e dispersando relativamente pouco, ou seja, a malha industrial brasileira está entre o centro de Minas e o nordeste do Rio Grande do Sul, está desconcentrando e reaglomerando a indústria, mais atividade, mais moderna, etc. Isso aqui, o que é o elemento novo? O elemento novo é o intencional e o que está acontecendo. Esse aqui nós fizemos, então, uma simulação, o que seria um projeto de interiorização do desenvolvimento brasileiro, comparável com o elemento novo, que o elemento novo é o seguinte. O elemento novo é a possibilidade de aproveitamento dos recursos do mar, principalmente com o petróleo e com o pré-sal. O petróleo e o pré-sal poderão levar a um efeito de relitoralização. Eu não sei como é que traduziria, levar de novo a economia para o litoral. A economia estava movendo para a região central e ela pode voltar, parte dela voltar para o litoral, em função dos efeitos de integração com a economia do mar, principalmente do pré-sal, que tem um grande potencial pela frente. Então, o que nós fizemos foi uma simulação de o que seria uma intencionalidade para pensar a geografia econômica do Brasil, o desenvolvimento regional brasileiro, à luz das mudanças em curso e das intencionalidades. Nós tomamos, isso aqui é uma simulação, que poderia ser usado, inclusive, o seu modelo, o modelo do Andrés. Tomamos as 11 metrópoles, eu vou passar o mapa seguinte, porque fica fácil para ver. Nós tomamos as 11 metrópoles consolidadas, que estão em vermelho, São Paulo, quer dizer, são 11, São Paulo é a metrópole central. Numa simulação, se houvesse intencionalidade, baseada na experiência do policentrismo europeu, da experiência francesa das metrópoles de equilíbrio, você eleger alguns centros para concentrar investimento urbano, em termos de infraestrutura urbana, equipamento urbano, principalmente educação e inovação, nas cidades que estão ali. Eu estou realmente com a tecnologia. Que seria o seguinte: as grandes cidades vermelhas seriam as cidades que já são os macropolos brasileiros, e ali a gente selecionaria Campo Grande, Cuiabá, Porto Velho, Palmas, São Luís e Belém, que seria a ideia e Uberlândia, isso aqui para segurar São Paulo para baixo e Brasília para cima, de concentrar investimentos públicos de infraestrutura, principalmente educacional, para redesenhar a geografia brasileira. Agora, esse investimento urbano teria que ser combinado com um maciço investimento de infraestrutura de acessibilidade, principalmente transportes. E aí o sistema de transporte, eu acho que ele tem que ser visto em duas dimensões. Eu acho que quando o Andrés apresentou o modelo dele, que eu acho que poderia e deveria ser aplicado para o Brasil nesse caso, o sistema de transporte interregional para fazer a integração macroespacial do país e o sistema de transporte intrarregional para fortalecer a capacidade de polarização dos novos polos. E nós fizemos também uma simulação com 22 subcentralidades, que seria exatamente para redesenhar e com o cuidado de manter na região amazônica um colar de cidades que deveriam ser centros para a criação de conhecimento novo para pensar a região amazônica. Então é o seguinte: à luz da dinâmica territorial de integração da economia brasileira, à luz do risco de uma relitoralização, eu acho que se há intencionalidade política, você poderia pensar, ainda no contraste entre Estado e mercado, uma política regional centrada em duas grandes dimensões: fortalecimento de uma rede urbana policêntrica, dada a dimensão geográfica do país. São Paulo vai continuar sendo a cidade primária, mas nós não podemos pensar o Brasil, por exemplo, tendo como referência a Inglaterra, onde você tem uma cidade primária, mas dada a escala, por exemplo, é possível ter apenas uma. Ou, no caso japonês, em que você tem Tóquio como a cidade primária. Eu acho que o Brasil é muito mais semelhante à experiência americana e o futuro do desenho da experiência japonesa que está sendo feito. Seria essa, digamos, uma forma de combinar as tendências da lógica do mercado com uma ação forte do Estado em termos de reorientar os investimentos públicos para fortalecimento do equipamento urbano, principalmente de educação e de inovação, conjugado com um serviço de infraestrutura ou investimento em infraestrutura que pudesse integrar de uma forma mais detalhada, mais definitiva, essas metrópoles para redesenhar a geografia econômica do Brasil. E mais ainda, eu não tive, porque eu resgatei agora na internet esses 3 mapas, um novo mapa que seria pensar a América do Sul, não a América Latina, porque a América Latina é um conceito mais cultural, do ponto de vista econômico é muito mais a América do Sul. Como é que o Brasil poderia integrar-se com a América do Sul, já que no miolo da América do Sul há um vazio econômico, um vazio populacional e um vazio de infraestrutura, e se há uma estratégia geopolítica e econômica de integrar a América do Sul, você tinha que pensar a malha de infraestrutura de transporte do Brasil integrando com os demais países da América do Sul. Então, essa, digamos, à luz das mudanças mundiais, da nova geografia econômica que está sendo desenhada, da posição do Brasil nesse redesenho, nós fizemos essa simulação, o que seria, digamos, um mapa do Brasil, se fosse, digamos, com uma intencionalidade posta para daqui a 20 ou 30 anos, nós rodamos um modelo gravitacional de rede urbana, fizemos uma simulação de indução diferenciada de investimento, apenas como simulação, e esse seria o redesenho do mapa do Brasil para daqui a 50 anos, digamos, se uma intencionalidade dessa natureza fosse feita para, digamos, fazer um projeto de desenvolvimento econômico que fosse nacional, não fosse mais o que o Brasil tem feito historicamente, que é políticas regionais isoladas por região, acho que isso está superado, tendo a ideia de que a cidade é o centro, cidade e infraestrutura de acessibilidade, coordenam e comandam o território. Então, o conjunto do território sendo visto a partir da cidade, a cidade como centro de inovação, como centro de produção, como centro de consumo e como centro de comando sobre o conjunto do território. Então, a partir da rede de cidades e de um programa de infraestrutura, de acessibilidade, principalmente transporte, você poderia fazer uma política regional de longo prazo, tá certo? Agora, a dificuldade política é exatamente de como compactuar num sistema federativo como o brasileiro a relação entre o governo central e os governos estaduais para fazer a decisão de seleção ou de escolha de quais as centralidades iriam receber prioritariamente o investimento. Num sistema mais autoritário, isso seria mais feito com a grande presença de empresas estatais, que foi o caso, por exemplo, francês do pós-Segunda Guerra Mundial, das metrópoles de equilíbrio, mas que foram todas elas muito alavancadas por investimento público. Numa economia em que você reduz a presença do Estado, cada vez mais dá força ao mercado, o que estava sendo feito, há algumas dificuldades, mas eu diria que há espaço ainda de investimento público para concentrar em termos da malha urbana, das novas centralidades, em termos da infraestrutura, e redesenhar, digamos, o Brasil sempre olhando para o que está acontecendo a termos da economia mundial e como é que o Brasil se insere nesse cenário. Eu termino aqui, faltando ainda 2 minutos, como disciplina, tá certo? E acho que tanto as provocações do Felipe para repensar a geografia econômica mundial, os efeitos da crise, os efeitos das transformações tecnológicas, e eu repito, a questão das trajetórias tecnológicas que estão sendo desenhadas, múltiplas trajetórias, poderão ter um efeito decisivo no futuro da economia mundial. Segundo, a perda de importância relativa dos Estados Unidos, a dificuldade da Europa, como é que o Brasil poderia se inserir nisto? Isso pelo lado da questão da geografia. E pelo lado da fala do Andrés, eu acho que pensar esse modelo de infraestrutura em cima das cidades, em cima do sistema de transporte, é decisivo para nós, pelo menos, termos alguns cenários de médio e longo prazo para a economia brasileira, como é que nós poderíamos ter uma política territorial, tá certo? Com uma intencionalidade de médio e longo prazo, sem conhecer que nós estamos no capitalismo, não vamos desconhecer as forças do mercado, mas é exatamente uma intencionalidade geográfica com a possibilidade de intervenção pública, de como é que combina isso, de alguma forma, com a lógica do mercado, para fazer uma intencionalidade de longo prazo. O Brasil ainda tem espaço para fazer política regional. O país está sendo construído. Muito obrigado.
Eu vou exercer o poder a mim instituído e vou, dado o adiantado da hora, agradecer enormemente a presença do professor Andrés, do professor Felipe, nosso magnífico reitor, agradecendo por essa mesa que eu acho que foi sensacional no sentido de trazer à baila tanto essa dimensão que o Campolino destacou, esse rebatimento no Brasil e desse país a ser construído, como essas experiências, tanto as trazidas pelo Felipe quanto pelo Andrés. Agradeço a todos, 10 minutos de café e daqui a pouco a gente volta. Obrigado.